Okay, I'll talk about the Nikon Zf. Sort of. Hello and welcome back to another video. Recently, my friend Kanai, a fellow photographer, invited me to do an interview series with her, and she asked me a bunch of questions about gear, which sort of got me down the rabbit hole of really ranting about how I feel about the gear culture and the obsession with gear on the internet. But I say that knowing full well that that's the kind of video that really attracts a lot of people. So I don't really knock anyone making gear videos, but I want to talk to you, the consumer, who's consuming these gear videos, and about camera gear as a whole. But also I want to talk about my new camera, the Nikon Zf, and why I bought it. So before we get into why I bought my camera, we have to talk about the cameras that I used to own. So I had two mirrorless interchangeable cameras for the last about 7 years. So the first was the Fujifilm X-T20, which I've had since about the middle of 2017. And the second is the original Sony A7, which I've had since about 2020, I think the end of 2019. And I bought that one used. And the X-T20 I bought brand new. Now, since I bought the X-T20, it has been my go-to camera for carrying around most of the time. It's the only interchangeable lens camera that I used to use daily. And when I wasn't using that, I was most likely using the X100T. The A7 I bought primarily because it was a very good deal, and I wanted to see what full-frame mirrorless was like. I had a lot of film lenses that I wanted to adapt to it, and that camera I've mostly used because it's weather sealed. It's been sort of my rough use camera when I know I'm going away for a little bit and the weather's going to be not amazing, and I also just used it to scan film for the longest time. I did want to use it to make videos, but while the sensor was quite nice and the quality was good, it didn't really shoot log and didn't have too many other video features, so it didn't really get too much use for me. But nonetheless, it was still a great camera, and when I used it for stills, it delivered, and I have no qualms against it. It was, however, a bit outdated compared to the modern Sony cameras. Now, my Fuji X-T20 that I've had for a very, very long time, I really enjoyed, and I was using it practically every day. And a few months ago, around like June or July, I was walking around one day and I took it out to take a picture, and it said card error. And I was like, what? Okay, well, sometimes this happens. The little pin on the SD cards get locked, so I just take it out and I put it back in, and it still said card error. Thankfully, I was in front of a camera store, so I just walked in and I bought a new SD card, and it still said card error. And so I got a little bit worried. I did some research, and there's like a motherboard issue that happens with that model. Mine just happened to conk out after 7 years of use. Now, this motherboard replacement is not cheap. It would cost me at least, I think, 400-ish Canadian dollars to get it replaced, if not more. I still have to send it in to get a quote, and I haven't done that yet, because to me that body should really only be worth 400-ish dollars, maybe. I know that the prices for Fujifilm cameras are a little bit inflated right now, even on the used market, so there's no accurate price for that. That's just in my head. I think that's what it would be worth. But anyway, I benched that camera because it's almost unusable now. I can really only use it with like really, really slow micro SD cards, and when I use those, they take really, really long to flush the buffer. So if I take 3 or 4 photos, I'm waiting a solid 15-20 seconds before it's written to the card. So it's not really particularly useful for me right now, but it still functions to some extent, so it's not completely dead. Now, I was going to just wait around till I could replace that or repair it. I was shooting the X100T exclusively for a little bit, and I really enjoyed getting back into using that camera more every day. And I really learned that I really, really like that rangefinder, so I was maybe thinking I'd look into the X Pros, but they don't make the X Pro 3 anymore, and buying it used is kind of a toss-up. You can't really find them too often, and sometimes they come up and they're the same price as a brand new X-T5, so I looked at other options for a while, but I decided that I'd be fine. And then I went for a few months, and in September, around when I moved back here to Ottawa, I decided that maybe I should consider something new. Now, I only did that because my primary camera was essentially crippled. Now, if the need hadn't arisen, I would have just continued to shoot the X-T20. I was more than happy with the results I was getting out of it. There wasn't anything that I felt like I was missing out. But of the two cameras that I had a primary photo camera and a camera that was full frame that I was using for scanning my film and I wanted to use for video. Now, I set out to replace camera 1, which is the X-T20. And so my thought was the natural choice, the obvious contender, should be the X-T5, the current generation top tier XT camera. And so I went into the store and I went to look at it. But the X-T5s are very nice cameras, don't get me wrong. The megapixel count is really high, it's good for video and photo, it's got all the newfangled features, and it's great, but something about the cost of it just was a little bit on the high side for me. Because I think they're about 2,400 Canadian dollars. And that's not horrible because I was budgeting around that. I was budgeting around 2,500 on the top end. But I was looking at the X-T5 and, like, not in a vacuum, X-T4s used are like 1,600, X-T3s are like 1,000. The X-T5 just didn't seem like it was necessarily worth the 2,200 for me. Because when you compare it to other things in that price range, for a couple hundred here or there, you can get full frame options. So for a second I thought, okay, let me consider something else. The alternative was initially the Panasonic S5 II, which is a fantastic video camera. If you haven't seen it, I'm sure you'll see a lot of creators using it. It's really, really quite full-fleshed in its video capacity. It's perfectly fine as a photo camera too, but it's primarily touted for its video capabilities. And I really like that because I was thinking I would get something to increase the quality of the content on this channel. And I wanted to get into something that shot log. None of my cameras shot log, so I thought maybe the S5 II looks great. But when I went to buy one, or at least when I was looking into getting one, I went to the store and they weren't on sale. And when they're not on sale, the price is a little bit on the high end. But something else caught my eye, which was something that I hadn't really considered until this point. Now, if you've seen my last video, or I may have put this in the title, you probably already know it's the Nikon Zf, which is a camera that I was aware of because when it was released, I saw lots of rumbles about it and people were talking about it and how it's nice and how it's the camera that Fuji won't make. I'm not going to weigh in on that because I feel like Fuji makes plenty good cameras and full frame is not something that they need to do, but I digress. Anyway, the ZF was a compelling choice. It's really good for video, it's really good for photo, and it fit in between and wasn't too much more expensive than the X-T5. So a little bit of humming and hawing later, I decided to go for it, primarily because there's a few things that were useful for me. So when I bought the ZF, it came with the FTZ2 adapter, and I did have some Nikon F lenses because my first camera was a Nikon DSLR. Not too many of them actually have the motor inside, but I figured it's still better to have that than nothing. And some of them are even DX lenses, which, it's fine. But I was surprised to learn that there is no existing non-motor drive FTs, like motor drive FTZ, but it is what it is. Maybe we'll get one, maybe we won't, we'll see. But the other thing that was great was that the camera is actually quite compact, and the lenses that do exist on the cheaper end, which is because at the time when I bought the body, I actually couldn't afford to buy any more lenses because of that budget that I'd set myself. So I thought I'll come back in a couple months and buy some lenses, but in the meantime I'll make my adapted lenses work, or I'll buy some adapters and use my manual focus lenses like I've been doing with the Sony. So I made the purchase, and great. And the reasons that I chose it were primarily because it was in my budget and it fit the needs that I wanted to fit. So I went out looking for a replacement for my X-T20, but I ended up actually replacing my A7, which I promptly sold afterwards and used some of that money to finance the purchase of lenses for the ZF, because now I have the 40mm f2 and the 28 2.8. I've only had the 28 2.8 for like 2 weeks, but the 40 I've had since around October. So I've had it for a while, and they're both great. I wanted to say that because I don't think I'm necessarily changing systems. For me, the Fujifilm system is still great. I really like that they're compact and they're small bodies, but they're capable, and there's lenses that are also small. And I think that with a lot of the full frame camera companies right now is they're making really, really great optically performing lenses, but a lot of them are just really, really massive. And maybe that's not a problem to the people who are out there buying these lenses, but I realized this year, after doing a lot of shooting on the street and stuff like that, that I really prefer small lenses and small bodies. So I want to compact my kit as much as possible. And so I thought that, you know, the ZF was a nice full frame option that had some small lenses, which would be good. And I do think that in the future, I will either end up getting my X-T20 repaired or replacing it with a used X-T of some kind, or if they come up with an X Pro, I will probably get a new one of those, because I'm not leaving. I really like the Fujis. I think they're more compact. I really like the lenses that I have for Fuji, and I will continue to use them. But this Nikon fits a need that was separate. It makes really good video, which is great, and at the same time right now, while my Fuji is decommissioned, it can also run as a photo camera. So it's great, works for me. Now, this is just a long-winded way of illustrating the point that I made in that video, which with my friend, which may or may not have been released yet, but if it has, I'll link it below. Otherwise, I'm just gonna say that it's important for you to figure out what your needs are, because when you're trying to buy a camera, everyone thinks that they're going to do everything from street to wildlife to event to weddings or whatever. You want that camera to be able to handle everything, but to the average consumer, who's especially someone who's starting out, you don't really know what it entails for a camera to be able to be good at everything. You know, it needs to have, you know, for sports, it needs to have really, really fast burst rates and good buffer and really good autofocus. Same with wildlife. And it needs to have a robust set of long-range zooms. But the average person buying a camera is probably going to buy, at least initially, one body and one lens. And might be the kit lens, might be a prime lens, I don't know. But it's just something that you don't really consider, is that your use case is going to be limited to begin with. And you also aren't really going to be getting as many opportunities to do sports or wildlife as you might think. But if you are a dedicated professional photographer or a dedicated wildlife photographer, you already know the camera that you want. This isn't for you. This is more for someone who has been influenced by the hype surrounding lots of different cameras or camera brands, who's just moving up from their phone, or who's trying to get into photography and are trying to buy a new camera. Is identify what it is that you value most. Do you value compactness? Do you value video specs? Do you value something else? Do you need a lot of resolution, a lot of low light? You know, there's a lot of these factors. And now I'm going to tell you the one thing that a lot of the gear obsessed part of the internet, or, you know, even some of the people who are very hardcore into one brand won't tell you, but the vast majority of reviews will have sort of implicitly told you, which is that there's really no, well, I don't like making blanket statements, but I'm going to make a general statement right now, and you take it with the correct meaning in the context, which is that there's really no bad camera from any of the big manufacturers in that, you know, in that range that you're going to buy, you know, like for the mid, like prosumer or even consumer range. There's really only cameras that are better value or they're better for you. So what I mean by that is that, like, if you went out today with $1,000 and you bought a brand new camera from any of the brands, they would all perform well. Some might perform better than the others, so you might be perceived perceiving better value. Some might be better at, say, video, or some might be better at autofocus or stabilization or something. So it really depends on what your needs are. Some might be bigger, some might be smaller. So based on that, there's no perfect camera that will work for everyone. The best of the best, most expensive cameras are either out of many people's price ranges, or you sacrifice a lot of portability. Like the Z9s are huge. The most expensive Sony cameras like the A1s use that global shutter that kind of reduces the dynamic range a little bit, or like makes it slightly worse for low light. There's all these trade-offs. There's always a compromise to be made in these cameras. So you just have to find the camera that is good for all the things you want it to do and has the compromises where you can manage to handle them. And so what I'm trying to say is, there's no reason for us to be sitting around completely tribalizing between these different brands. At the end of the day, that company is going to make cameras. Like that's all they're doing. They don't care what you're saying or doing. At the end of the day, they're just doing what they can do. Pick a camera based on how it performs, not by who made it, or just pick a camera based on how it fits your needs. There's no reason to feel offended by someone not liking a camera that you like, because your needs might be so different. So at the end of the day, just pick a camera based on whether or not it works for you. That's what I'm trying to say. And specifically, I want to say about all these features that we get with these cameras now. There's IBIS, there's really good autofocus, all of these fantastic features, full frame sensors, APS-C sensors. None of that really matters to the extent that if you can only afford a micro four thirds camera, then buy that and take pictures, because the fact that you have a camera is better than you sitting there trying to get all the money together to try and get a full frame camera. A full frame camera might be better than a random micro four thirds camera, but there's better cameras in, so you can compare the worst full frame camera and the best micro four thirds camera, and the micro four thirds camera might come up on top. Sensor size, all of these features, they only matter as much as you let them. So realistically, no one's going to care if the photo you took, if it wins an award or something. They're not going to come to you and ask you if you took it on an iPhone or Leica M11. It just matters that you took the photo. So pick a camera, figure out your budget. It's very important that you find a budget and you pick a camera that works for you. My recommendation is, maybe you don't always need to get the newest and greatest, because there's always another newest and latest and greatest coming up around the corner. These camera companies are constantly innovating and creating new things. There's a lot of really, really great features now that are really nice, but like I said, for the last 7 to 8 years, I've been using cameras that were made 7 to 8 years ago, and they've been great. I've had no complaints in terms of the quality that's been coming out of them. And there's certain things that would be nice to have, like log video, but was it something that I absolutely needed? No. It's something that I wanted to get to increase the quality of the content that I'm making, purely just to increase production value. But I could sit here and film this on a webcam and it'd be great, so long as I had something worthwhile to say. Quick little interjection to go over two things that I didn't explicitly mention in the last portion is that, one, you should really look at the lenses available for the system when picking a new camera, because not only does the camera need to fit your needs, but so do the lenses. And some mounts are more open, some are less so. So take a look at the availability of lenses, because some of these guys have been in the game for longer. Like Sony has had the most mature mirrorless full frame system, so they probably have the most lenses. Their mount is also the most open, and so the others might be following suit. But if there's enough lenses that fit your needs, then that's good enough. And then the other thing is that sort of alluded to is that these changes to your system don't need to be a big thing. It's not a big drastic like, I've left this brand and I'm going to this brand. Like, yeah, sure, it's something that people might be interested in. But what I'm trying to say is it really shouldn't be a big deal, because at the end of the day, you're picking the tools that work best for you. And if one brand isn't doing it, switching to another brand it's a normal thing to do. And it doesn't need to be catastrophized as like, oh, this brand is bad, I don't like them anymore. It's just that it just didn't work for you and it didn't meet your needs at this point. That's all. So the Nikon Zf, I really like this camera. I mean, it should come as no surprise. There's countless videos on YouTube about people loving this camera, and I would say that for the most part, they are all absolutely correct. It's a very fun camera to use. I like the layout of the controls. It's very reminiscent of the Fujis that I'm used to, which I think is a very intuitive control mechanism. But again, I'm not a professional photographer, so I understand why this wouldn't be for everyone. But for people like me who are hobbyists, who like to use the camera for themselves and aren't necessarily using it for jobs, I think it's a great choice. And when I say that, this is a perfectly capable camera quality wise. It's just that the ease of use for certain settings might not be to everyone's taste. And so to that extent, I say it might not be the most appropriate choice for professional work, but I would gladly use this for professional work. It has 2 card slots, which is something that a lot of people tout as a pro feature, which the second card slot is a micro SD, but it's fine. It works great. So anyway, I like that the dials are really nice feeling too, which is great. But the thing about them is that they can be a little bit confusing when you just first pick one up. But it only took me about a day to get used to how these dials work. So I would say it's not too bad. I'd say what is a lot worse is the Nikon menu system. And I think that's actually something that's a downside to the whole Z line as a whole, or Z line, is that these, actually, I just realized I say Nikon Z lenses, but I say ZF. So I'm not particularly consistent there. I will try and fix that. Anyway, so when you go into the photo shooting menu, for example, like there's all these options for photo, and then when you go into video, there's like a video option, but then there's a third menu called the custom settings menu, and that one has more photo settings and more video settings. What's that about? Why aren't they just all in the relevant section? That's a little bit weird to me, but I think, again, it's something you would get used to pretty quickly. If you had one of these cameras already, you probably already know. The only other real gripe for me is the viewfinder, and this is a low gripe, I think, because I had the X-T20 for so long, and I didn't think there was anything wrong with that viewfinder, but I think maybe the quality of or the bokeh of the full frame sort of makes it more apparent, but I think that they could use a slightly higher definition viewfinder, like more resolution would be better, but it's a small nitpick. Now, other things I want to say, resolution wise, fantastic. 24 megapixels I think is perfectly fine. I think maybe like if I had to reach, I'd say in the 30s, 36s would be like the sweet spot. I don't really like to go all that way up to 40. I think it's almost too much. It's also something that deterred me a little bit of the X-T5, because I was a little bit worried that getting that many megapixels into that sensor would cause it to be worse at low light. Which, another thing this excels at, low light is fantastic. With my older cameras, I didn't really go over like 1600, 3200 at the most, even with the A7. On this thing, I keep it on like 6400 on the top end as my auto ISO range, but I would push it even further. I've seen people get really great results as long as you're exposed correctly. Looks great. The video is phenomenal. If you've seen all the B-roll, it's the ones with the little bars on the side that I've put on a few of the videos in the last few months. They all came from the ZF. I'm sure there'll be an intro at the start of this video that was filmed on the ZF. So the video is great. Can't complain. I like the analog, but I'm not any expert on video, so take it all with a grain of salt. I just know that I like the look that comes out of it, and I don't have a horrible time grading the analog, and even though I don't really know what I'm doing about video grading. Anyway, Now, the lens lineup. This is a little bit interesting. I really like these two little lenses, the 40 f2 and the 28 2.8. I know that there's a 26, which is also small. It's even smaller than these. But this is what I like. This is where it's at. You know, a lot of these mirrorless brands, they have lenses that are just way too big. And I know that when I say that, I sound a little bit bitter because I know I can't afford like the G Master lenses or anything like that, or like L series lenses. But even if I could, I don't know if I'd want to buy one because, like I said, I'm not doing professional work. For my uses of going on the street, taking, you know, documentary photos and street photos and just like documenting my life, I prefer having smaller lenses. It just makes more sense. I'm not really looking for the greatest resolution or anything. Sharpness is, if it's decently sharp, that's all that matters to me. I don't need it to be like 100%, blow it up to the size of a building. It's going to be perfect. None of that. You know, as much as I'd like a medium format digital camera, I'm not going to lose any sleep over that because this is plenty of stuff. And the 40 millimeter lens, great. I've heard really great things about the 51.8S lens, but it's a little bit close to the 40, so I don't know if I'm going to be picking one up anytime soon. Nonetheless, I do like that lens, and I'd like to get a few lenses on to this camera that are manual focus. There's one small strange thing with the manual focus experience on this, by the way, which is it's very good, the manual focus experience, but when you shoot with lenses that aren't adapted with contacts, you don't really get focus confirmation, you don't get metering, things that are a little bit weird. So I'd like to see some manual focus lenses that are native to the mount. Maybe they'll fare a little bit better, maybe they'll have contacts or something. But I've also seen some hacks that get around it using like smart adapters and then lenses for other mounts. So I'm going to check a lot of things out. And overall though, I'm very pleased with the camera. I would say there's very few in terms of actual dislikes that I have, and overall it's great. It's actually quite compact for a full frame camera. It's a little bit heavy, but not something that terribly bothers me. I like the grip. I do think it's just a little bit thicker than it needs to be. I know that there's a smaller one from Newer. This is the small rig one, the official one, and I really like the grip. I think that it's not too expensive and it's good. If it was slightly smaller, I think it'd make the camera a little bit more compact and also maintain a good gripability, but I can always take it off, which is nice. I just really like having like a little bit to hold on to like this. That's why I keep the grip on, but it's not strictly necessary. Go with whatever works for you if you are thinking of this camera. But image quality wise, it's great. I'm sure you've been seeing all the photos that have been throughout this video. They were all taken on this camera. And, you know, I didn't want to talk about it to begin with when I got it because, one, it's a very hyped camera and I don't really like doing this sort of gear review. But I'm telling you, because if you think that your use case and your needs align with mine, then this could be the camera for you. Nonetheless, you know, there's tons and tons of videos about this camera. Everyone seems to really enjoy it. It's super fun and it's got a lot of hype, sort of along the lines of the Fuji, but not necessarily in the Fuji world. But yeah, that's that. And now let's come back to talk about GAS for a second, or gear acquisition syndrome, which is the fancy terminology that we've built up so that we have this fictional ailment that only affects photographers but also actually affects everyone in every hobby ever. And that's, you know, wanting to get a new camera. Now, I bought this camera out of almost necessity, and that's really sort of the way I like to view it. Is obviously if you have the funds and you think that you would benefit from an upgrade and you've really thought about it, then, you know, power to you, get what you want. But, you know, this idea of technology, and also in this, you know, consumerist hellscape that we live in, there's so many options and these brands just keep dropping camera after camera after camera. So, you know, that gas isn't really going to go away. So ideally, I'd like to think that if you want to feel a little bit better about your gas, maybe you should think about finding an end point for yourself. You know, think about like a grail camera. Like what what's the end all be all for you, and how achievable is it, and do you need it? And for me, like everyone else in this documentary slash street genre, it's obviously gonna be a Leica. All right, okay, look, I've always wanted a digital Leica. Film Leicas are great, don't knock them. I would probably own one, but I just feel like if I'm gonna shell out the money for a Leica, I'm probably gonna get a digital one, because film's just going up in price. I'm not gonna be looking into bulk loading or stuff myself because I live in a small apartment. I don't really have the time or the space. So for me, digital Leica, right? Digital Leica. But this year, out of all the years that I've been shooting, so I've always wanted one, but for the longest time I was like, I don't think I need one, or I don't think that I've earned it, right? I don't think that I'm good enough to warrant that, and I'm also not rolling in money, so it's not something that I need to really think about too much. But this year I sort of really figured out why I would justify a Leica purchase over anything else, because for the longest time my reasoning was that like, look at Leica, right? They sell these cameras, and I know that they're handmade and their optics are some of the best in the world, but the prices on those cameras are just as much as some of the best cameras from the other companies. And I know that Leica really only makes essentially one line of camera, and it's like one camera and then a slight incremental adjustments. But I don't really know too much about them because I don't want to get into it and then convince myself that I need one. But anyway, the fact that they were so expensive, I just couldn't justify spending that amount of money. So I was like, you know what? I'd rather get a camera from a different brand that had more going on and was doing more, was better. And for a really, really long time, that gap before mirrorless was as good as it is. That gap of DSLR to optical quality on Leicas was, not bridged, right? Because the lenses weren't as close to the sensor, so they would never be able to compete. And now they can sort of compete to some extent, but let's not beat around the bush. Leica optics are Leica optics. They are revered because they are that good. And this year I realized that I really just want everything to be compact. So that's why I'm going to continue shooting with Fuji when I am able to replace my camera. But if I could, I would buy a Leica, because they're probably the only brand out there that's making full frame cameras that are very compact, with lenses that are equally compact but do not at the same time diminish the quality. Because the best lenses from Sony or Nikon or any other manufacturer, they're huge. Even the Leica SL lenses are huge, but Leica M lenses, they're tiny. Comparatively, they're so small. The Summilux, the Summicrons, they're so small. So they really do strike that, perfect size to quality. But, obviously you give up a few things. You give up autofocus, you give up, all the video functions and all of that. But it's not going to be something that I'm thinking about doing right away or anything like that. I don't think the dream has changed, but the dream has become a little bit more focused as to why the Leica makes sense for me. But, at the same time, if you offered me a Leica Q versus an X100 I think that I'd buy the X100 because it's so much cheaper. And I think that it would be 90%, if not more, of the camera that the Leica Q3 is. But that's just me. It works for me. I love my X100T, so I know that I've loved the X100 but it might not be the case for everyone. So there's no blanket statement on Leica's good or bad, or Qs are better than X100s, or vice versa. It's just that's how it works for me. And so what I'm trying to say is, realistically, if you're starting out or you have a camera, try and get the most out of your camera before you hit that roadblock that actually requires you to upgrade. And when you're going to buy a camera, forget all the noise, the hype around this or that, or like Sony has the best autofocus or Panasonic has the best stabilization. None of that really matters to you unless that's what you need. So the value of any camera can only really be decided by you. And when I say about like the monetary value of it, sure, secondhand cameras right now are very inflated, especially compact cameras, because the world works in trends, the market works in trends. People in marketing have always known that, and TikTok has just really greatly expanded the ability to create trends. And so this camera market is in a crazy trend of the Fujifilms and the film simulations and all of that stuff. But that's not necessarily going to be the best camera for you. You might be into something completely different, and maybe the brand that you're looking at or the brand that's hyped has an option that fits for you, but maybe it doesn't. So if you don't really own a lot of gear in a brand already, or if you're not comfortable with a brand already, there's really no reason for you to not consider something from a different brand or something from a different manufacturer or something you've never heard of, because I don't really care about that kind of stuff. I bought this Nikon because it fit my needs and it fit my budget, but I would gladly have bought an A7 if one of those was within my range. The 3 was kind of like older and not really worthwhile to pick up, and the 4 was also a little bit older, but just outside on the top end of my range. Things weren't on sale, so when I bought my camera, that was the best option for me. But realistically, I have no gripes against any camera. If a camera works, I'll use it. And that's really what I'm trying to get across is, well, I guess I'm trying to make very many points, but the points are there's really very few cameras that are actually actively bad. So like most cameras are good. You got to find the camera that works for you and your budget. 2, forget all the noise, the tribalism. Just pick whatever you think is going to be best for you. Go to the store, try out the cameras, make your decision yourself. And I guess sort of vaguely a third is that the opinion of any reviewer like myself or someone who actually does more reviews is that you trust their opinion, you trust their views, and you align your needs with what they're saying. So if you don't, that's fine. That review isn't really worthwhile for you, but they might say something that resonates with you, and that's really where the validity of the review is. A reviewer might not like something, but you are not them. So, there are objective tests, but with a lot of, like I'm saying, there's a lot of really, really good cameras out there. So these little like nitpicks that go on, like on paper, there might be some things that are better or worse, but how much of it really matters really just depends on you and also your use case. There's a 35 megapixel camera versus a 24 megapixel camera. Sure, you can get more croppability, but if you can only afford the 24 one, it might just be fine. 24 is plenty of megapixels. That's sort of a turnabout way of saying the same thing, but you get what I mean. One last interjection before our outro, and that's to just say that all of this should just boil down to one thing, and that's that none of all of the gear and stuff should really matter that much. I'm not saying that you shouldn't care about it. If that brings you joy, that's fine, but the most important thing is to enjoy yourself and to have fun, because this is your hobby. This is something that you like to do ideally, and so you should be invested in doing it and the results and all of that. You shouldn't have to be stressed out or worried about what you're using or why you don't have something that you need. You should just be trying to get the most out of what you have and have a good time. So if you're having a good time, it doesn't matter. So if caring about gear is what causes you to have fun, if that's fun to you, then do that. I'm not here to tell you otherwise. But overall, the most important thing is that fun. So if you're enjoying yourself, it doesn't matter if it's a phone, a point and shoot, Sony, Fuji, Canon, doesn't really matter. As long as you're having a good time, that's good. That's all that matters. And that's what you should take away from this video. But yeah. All right, on to the outro. Anyway, that's a lot of yapping. I've been saying a lot of stuff. Spoke about the ZF for a little bit. If you want me to talk about it more in depth, reach out to me or ask me questions. But as a whole, I hope that you got something out of this video. If you made it all this way, great. Thank you so much for watching and listening to me tell you about everything wrong with gear and gear obsession, but also to tell you sort of how to look beyond it and all the videos and all the signals from all these brands and all the marketing. But if you didn't get anything out of it, I apologize for wasting your time, but hopefully you'll get something out of the other videos. So keep watching. And yeah, if you have any questions, any comments, if you agree with me, disagree with me, leave a comment and I'd be happy to talk. I'm always willing to hear you out. I'm not going to be offended if you don't agree with me. My opinion only matters as much as the value that you assign to it. And you can decide whether or not anything I say is worth listening to, or if it's something you don't care about. That's fine. It's completely fine. So yeah, take it with a grain of salt if you don't like what I'm saying, but if you do, then great. And I'll see you in the next one.